The moment Prince Harry walked onto that stage, he believed the world was ready to listen, not to challenge him. 20 minutes later, he would be standing at the edge of the set, his face flushed with anger, realizing the cameras had caught every second. Before we begin, make sure you follow this channel so you never miss the kind of stories that reveal what really happens when power and ego collide. The lights in the studio were warm, the kind meant to flatter guests, but the heat in the room was already different. Kelly Clarkson greeted him with that familiar smile, the kind millions knew from their screens, but her eyes were sharp, reading him the way a singer reads a crowd. Harry leaned back in the chair, as if the seat belonged to him, his posture wide, his gaze distant. Kelly began with a question about his new book, her tone gentle but curious. Harry's answers were measured at first, but there was a faint edge in his voice, as if every word was a reminder that he was doing the show a favor. The audience noticed the shift before the second question came. When Kelly asked whether airing family matters so publicly was the right choice, Harry's jaw tightened. His voice rose slightly, talking of lies, of years of injustice, of the weight his wife had carried. Kelly listened, her head tilting, then pressed again, asking whether change could come from working inside the system. The air thickened. Harry laughed, but there was no humor. He spoke of his mother, of failed attempts to modernize the monarchy, and the audience began to lean in, sensing the spark of something volatile. Kelly did not retreat. Instead, she asked about his life now in California, and Harry's answer, though calm on the surface, carried a sharpness that was not meant to be missed. Kelly's next question was about the projects he had taken on since leaving the royal family, but the way she framed it seemed to strike him differently. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, accusing her of turning the conversation into an interrogation. The audience shifted in their seats, glancing from one to the other, aware that something was building. Kelly, still smiling but no longer with the same warmth, reminded him that he was there to talk about his work and his life. He countered, saying he had come to discuss important issues, not to be questioned like a criminal. The studio grew quieter. The cameras caught every flicker in his expression, every clench of his hands. Kelly told him plainly that this was a talk show, and the questions were part of the deal. He called her tone confrontational. She told him the questions were about the very topics his team had requested. Then he said something that made the entire room change. His publicist, he claimed, had not prepared her properly for the interview. Kelly's smile faded. Her voice was firmer now, her words sharper. She reminded him of the preparation her team had done, the time they had spent reading his book, researching his charities, building questions to highlight the very causes he claimed to care about. If he did not want questions about his life, she said, perhaps he should not have written a book about it. That was the first moment the audience gasped. Harry sat up straighter, his cheeks coloring, the air between them thick with unspoken challenge. The cameras stayed on him as he tried to regain control, but his grip on the moment was already slipping. Harry rose slightly from his seat, his voice tight as he said he did not appreciate her tone and that he was not used to being spoken to in such a way. Kelly's reply came quick, a cool reminder that perhaps this was part of the problem. The audience murmured, sensing they were watching something rare. She spoke of how people in his life might have spared his feelings instead of telling him the truth, and how that had left him unprepared for moments like this. Harry demanded to know what she meant, his words clipped, his posture rigid. She told him plainly that maybe if more people had been honest with him, he would have learned to handle criticism without falling apart. The studio lights seemed hotter now, his face a deeper red, his knuckles white on the arm of the chair. He tried to speak of his challenges, of experiences she could not understand. Kelly's answer was swift. From where she stood, it looked like his greatest challenge was behaving like an adult when he was not being praised. There was another sharp intake of breath from the audience. Harry opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came. Kelly kept her eyes on him, her voice calm but unyielding. She told him she knew what it was like to work for everything she had, to face criticism, and still stand tall. He was breathing hard now, his chest rising and falling. "I think this interview is over," he said at last. Kelly leaned back, her eyes steady, and told him she believed it was only just beginning. Harry's eyes darted toward the audience, as though searching for an ally, but the room stayed silent. He spoke of his goodwill in appearing on the show, insisting he had been attacked. Kelly's tone sharpened, reminding him that she had only asked about the book he had written, the very one he was there to promote. If he considered that an attack, she said, perhaps he was not ready for the real world. The phrase hit him hard. His voice cracked as he spoke of his military service, of combat, of years devoted to charity. Kelly did not flinch. She told him that being on television meant facing questions, and some might be uncomfortable. That was not an attack, she said. That was how interviews worked. He began pacing behind the chair, accusing her of twisting his words, calling her a media vulture. The audience gasped, their eyes moving between them like a crowd at a match. Kelly's voice dropped lower, but it carried a dangerous edge. She spoke of her years in the business, of the thousands she had interviewed, and how no guest had ever accused her of that for simply doing her job. He argued back, saying others had been more polite. She replied that perhaps they understood the expectation to talk when appearing on a talk show. Harry's shoulders tensed, his hands gesturing sharply, claiming he was having a meaningful conversation. Kelly told him she had only repeated his words and asked questions. He called her obtuse. Her laugh was short, cold. She told him he was making himself look bad without her help. Harry's security shifted in the shadows, alert now as his frustration climbed. He accused Kelly of jealousy, saying she resented what he was born into. That was the wrong move. Kelly's expression hardened, and though she was shorter, she seemed to tower over him as she rose from her chair. Her voice was steady, but filled with something fierce. Jealous of what? She asked. Of his inability to take criticism, his habit of throwing tantrums when things did not go his way, his constant need to be seen as a victim despite a life of privilege. Harry tried to push back, speaking of challenges she could never understand, but Kelly pressed on, saying his real challenge was accepting when someone refused to worship the ground he walked on. His mouth opened, then closed, no words coming. Kelly's voice was even now, almost quiet, but each sentence struck harder than the last. She told him she knew what it was like to face adversity, to endure public judgment, and to still do her job with dignity. He was breathing heavier now, his temper visible in every movement. He repeated that the interview was over. Kelly replied with cool certainty that it was far from over, and that perhaps walking away would only prove her point. The air between them seemed ready to snap, the audience frozen, waiting to see who would break first. Harry's voice rose again, insisting he had come to speak on serious matters like mental health and truth, accusing her of turning it into an ambush. Kelly leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, telling him this was not an ambush, but what happened when someone refused to bow to his title or his victim narrative. He fired back, bringing up his mother's death, the treatment of his wife, the toll on his marriage and mental health. She listened without flinching, then told him tragedy did not grant him a lifetime pass to avoid questions or accountability. He turned to the audience, appealing for their sympathy, asking if they could believe her treatment of him. The silence that met him was heavier than any applause. Some in the front row nodded at Kelly's words. Realizing the crowd was not with him, he accused her of turning them against him. Kelly's reply was calm but cutting. She treated all guests with respect, she said, until they proved they did not deserve it. He had come in with an attitude, questioned her professionalism, and hurled accusations. That, she said, made him not special, only difficult. His security looked uneasy, glancing toward the wings where his publicist was no doubt frantic. Harry called the situation ridiculous, saying he would not stay for more abuse. Kelly stood, telling him he did not have to stay, and perhaps it was better if he left. The audience gasped, unsure if they had just witnessed the moment she ended the interview. Harry's face showed disbelief as he asked if she was really telling him to leave. Kelly's voice did not waver. She was not asking, she said, she was telling him. He was not ready for a conversation like this, and her audience deserved better than to watch a grown man unravel over a few direct questions. He scanned the room for someone to intervene, but his security stayed still and his publicist was nowhere to be seen. His voice grew sharper, declaring that she could not simply throw him off her stage and asking if she knew who he was. Kelly answered without hesitation. She knew exactly who he was, a man too accustomed to getting his way, a man who mistook personal tragedy for a free pass to behave however he wished, and a man who was no longer welcome on her stage. Turning to the audience, she began to apologize for what they had seen, calling it an unusual moment for her show. Harry snapped back, telling her not to speak for him. She told him she was speaking to people who understood that respect was earned, not demanded. His face deepened to a shade of purple, and he warned her that she did not understand the consequences of her actions. Kelly's expression turned cold. She asked if he was threatening her. He denied it, but she said consequences worked both ways, and the result of his behavior was that he would be escorted out. She gestured toward her own security team, shifting the power in the room entirely. 3 suited men stepped forward, and in that instant, the energy shifted completely. This was no longer Harry's stage to command. He muttered under his breath, still backing away, calling the moment unprofessional and warning that the press would hear about it. Kelly's reply carried a sharp smile with no warmth. She told him the press would indeed hear, because every word, every glare, every flash of temper had been recorded, and she would make sure it aired in full. Harry froze for a heartbeat, then accused her of bluffing. Her answer was simple: "Watch me." The security team guided him toward the exit, his own guards following behind like a reluctant procession. The audience remained frozen until the studio doors closed behind him, and then the applause broke out, not polite or uncertain, but loud and certain in its support. Kelly turned back to the cameras, her composure fully returned. She told viewers that in 2 decades of television she had learned that some people grow when faced with adversity, while others reveal who they truly are. The pause that followed let her words sink deep. They would return after the break, she said, with a guest who knew what it meant to face challenges with dignity. Off camera, the crew spoke in hushed voices, aware they had just witnessed something unforgettable, a clash of entitlement and reality that no one in the room would soon forget. So there you have it. The full account of how Prince Harry managed to turn a simple television appearance into a standoff that ended with him being walked off set. The footage would soon spread far beyond that studio, not through whispers or backstage rumors, but in crystal clear high definition, broadcast exactly as it happened. It was not a story of one sharp exchange or a single cutting remark. It was 20 minutes that stripped away every layer he had built to shield himself from criticism. The power in the room had shifted more than once, but by the end, it was clear who had control. Kelly stood where she always had, grounded, unshaken, and speaking to an audience that understood every word. Harry had come expecting soft praise, a stage where his narrative would be accepted without challenge. Instead, he met someone who refused to bend to his title, who would not let emotion or status dictate the truth being spoken. In that refusal, she delivered something that resonated with far more than her audience in the studio. It was a moment that reminded people watching at home that respect is not inherited, it is earned, and that sometimes the hardest thing to face is a mirror held up in front of millions. Whether one agreed with her approach or not, no one could deny that the exchange had revealed more than Harry had ever planned to share. And as the credits rolled that day, the story was already leaving the studio, headed for every screen it could find.